Welcome everyone to the seminar tonight, legislative update and short session forecast with our representative from the House in North Carolina. We're going to wait just a few seconds and see if we can, allow a few more people to get on, and just hang tight. I'm pleased tonight to have with us a Representative Julie von Haefen. We were supposed to have Lisa Grafstein join us tonight, and she unfortunately is not going to be able to make it. So Julie has graciously agreed to pitch hit and put any perspective in that we need from the Senate, but we're not going to pick on her too bad, because what we really want to do tonight is to do an overview of the consequences of both the House and the Senate over the past and what we might look forward to in the coming session. But let me tell you a little bit about Julie. She's an attorney. She has 3 children who are in the public school. I guess one has moved on to college now. Julie, is that correct? So they have at a public university. Before her election to the North Carolina House, she served as Wake County PTA president. And she was on the North Carolina PTA Board of Directors. She's a certified guardian ad litem in Wake County. And one of the things that I'm always impressed about is that she has actually been out volunteering in our schools, and she's been substitute teaching in our schools. And I think maybe she'll have an opportunity to share with you a little bit about that experience and that hands-on and firsthand look into what's going on in our classrooms. She's received her bachelor's degree from Ohio University and her law degree from Case Western Reserve University. She practiced law for 10 years in a variety of areas, including criminal law, medical malpractice defense, municipal law, and education law. So Julie, welcome back. And we appreciate you being here. And so we would like to do kind of 2 things tonight for our audience. And a lot of folks who have been writing into us. So we did have, it just seemed like it just ended the long session of 2023. And in fact, it did just seem like it ended. But we wanted to really go over kind of quickly some of the good, the bad, the ugly, some of the consequences of the long session in terms of public education, our children, our educators. And there were some things that moved the needle forward on several things, and then we had some things that are still lacking. And then once we do that, I'm going to give you a chance to shift over, and we want to talk about this coming short session and opportunities for public education advocates to be informed and to get involved. So I'm going to, Julie, let you kind of do a little summary for us.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining. Like Yvonne said, I'm Julie von Haefen. I'm in my 3rd term in the North Carolina House, first elected in 2018. And I really ran, if you don't know my background, like Yvonne kind of just said, I mean, I have 3 kids that all went through Wake County Public Schools. 2 of them are in high school now, and then one's at UNC Chapel Hill. But when my kids were younger, I stayed home with them. I like to say I retired from practicing law to be a mom. And while I was doing that, I got really involved with PTA, and it's really what led me to run for office. My background in public school advocacy, seeing, what was going on in North Carolina public schools through my work, both in Wake County and in the state with the state PTA. I just knew that we just need to elect more public school champions to our legislature, because we're sorely lacking right now in those. And so luckily, after asking 3 times, every year the speaker appoints members to the committees in the North Carolina House. And every year I would ask to be on the K-12 education committee, because I felt like I had something to contribute. And every time I was told no, until this year, he finally agreed and put me on the K-12 education committee. And I've been really enjoying it, kind of, being one of the people I feel like in the committee to ask a lot of questions and to challenge a lot of the things that have been going on there this year. As you know, there was some really bad pieces of legislation that we heard in committee. Some of them passed, some of them didn't. But some of the really bad things that stuck out from this year was, of course, the Parents' Bill of Rights, which is just has so many different elements to it that are really devastating, both to our LGBTQ youth as well as just teachers in general, and to our administrators. It's going to add just so much more administrative work when you think about all the things that it's going to require of our school districts and our schools. I just want to make sure you can hear me okay, because it's kind of lagging on my end. Yvonne, we're good? Okay. I'm kind of like doing that robotic thing in my camera. So, um, so the Parents' Bill of Rights is probably the most devastating thing, that we heard this year. The second, honestly, very devastating thing as well from a financial standpoint was the passage of, or the expansion of our private school voucher program. If you don't know, we've had private school vouchers, or what they call opportunity scholarships, for several years now, but the really devastating thing that happened this year was that we removed the salary requirements for what families can receive those vouchers. So now, any family can receive them no matter what your family income is. So you could be a millionaire and receive state money to go to a private school. The other thing that is really devastating was that, I could already be sending my kids to private school, paying for it myself. I can afford it and I got my kids in. And now the voucher program will be open to anyone, even if your students are already enrolled in a private school. So before, the whole messaging was that these vouchers were for people to, have the choice to go to school, to leave the public school and go to private school. But, that kind of charade has been now lifted, because now they're offered to anybody, even if you've already made that choice to go to private school. And so we know that this expansion of the private school voucher program is going to cost our state pretty, like, almost $500 million. And over the decade, it'll be about $4.4 billion that it's going to cost our state. It's going to deprive, there's lots of different figures floating around, but the one that most recently is that if even just half the students, chose the voucher program, it would lower our funding to public schools by 8%, which at a time when our public schools are already extremely underfunded, and that we're already facing, constitutional crisis when it comes to the Leandro case. This is just, we are heading in the wrong direction when it comes to supporting our public schools. And, this whole thing has been done under the guise of school choice. But, I know Public Schools First NC is doing a great campaign right now talking about how our public schools should be our first choice, and that within the public school system, we already have a lot of choices. And so we have to take back the narrative, in my opinion, that this is about choice, because it's not. It's about, lining the pockets of wealthy people. It's about these corporations coming into our state. They have lots and lots of lobbying money that has been being poured into North Carolina to get these vouchers, because they know that it's going to protect their bottom line. It's going to get more kids in the seats. And, we have to look at kind of behind the curtain. This is not about helping kids, because the kids that really need to be helped are most of the kids that aren't going to go to a private school because they can't afford it. Most of these vouchers don't even cover half of the tuition that these private schools are charging. So I think when I think back to last year in 2023, those are the two big pieces of change, as far as both budgetary and policy, that really stuck out this year. Lots of other things, but I'll stop there and maybe if you had any questions about that, or I can keep going, whatever.
Well, Julie, since let's stop for a second and make sure that if, these things that you've just mentioned and then, we'll, let's talk about it a little bit because, one of the things, and please, audience, forgot to introduce Heather Coons. She's our communication director. You'll get to see her later. She's here. She's going to be paying attention to the chat. If you don't want to speak out, raise your hand, whatever, just stick it in the chat and we'll get around to answering your question. But Julie, you said something about the 8% reduction in the public school funding. Could you explain to us how that translates? Because when, what we are told by the supporters of school vouchers is this is not going to, impact public schools. That's, there's no impact. We've put money in an account for that.
Well, I mean, when the voucher program bill came down, so it was filed as a separate bill, and then what happened is that they didn't pass it as that separate bill. It was rolled into the budget, but when the bill came down and it was filed, the Office of Budget Management, who's like a nonpartisan state agency, did an evaluation of how much that bill would basically deprive our funding. And so basically it's like it does get complicated, and I'll admit that, I'm not going to get into all the details or even know all the details of how they did this calculation. But basically, schools are funded on a per pupil basis, right? And so if a student is not going to that school district is not going to get the amount of money that that student would represent. So right now, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you probably know better, Yvonne, off the top of your head, but I think the per pupil spending right now is per student is around $11,000 per student. Does that sound right to you?
Yes.
So if the student is going to the district, that district's going to get $11,000. Now, if they don't go there and they go to a private school, obviously that's going to hurt the bottom line of that district. Now, yes, the student isn't there, but you have to think about all the other things that district depends on a certain enrollment and all those kind of things. And so if that district keeps losing students, they're losing funding, and then they're not going to be able to provide for the students that are still there. And that's, I think, for public school advocates like myself and many others probably on this call, like you kind of see where that's going, right? You see that they're depriving these districts of the funding for all the students that are left there. And that's the most concerning thing for me. I think a lot of people would say, well, I'm not against choice, right? Like, it's good to have choices, and, maybe a private school is better for my student. And, I'm not opposed to that. And I think most people would say, that's great. If you want to go to a private school, great. But the whole point is that we shouldn't be giving public money to pay for private ventures, especially when a vast majority of these schools are religious. They discriminate. They don't allow many students into their building because of many different reasons, whether they're not the same religion, or they might be gay, or they have disabilities. And so, we just have to think of it as a public good. And when we're all putting money into a public good, we have to make sure that everyone can take advantage of it. And that's why I think a lot of people, including myself, are very opposed to using public money for these private ventures.
I like what you said though about it's kind of the economy of scales, right? That economic theory, and then it plays out like you're going to have a school bus, whether there's 10 kids on it or 12.
Yeah,
So you're still going to pay for the school bus and the gas. And the same thing, the building's going to have to be heated and lights are going to turn on, and you're going to have a principal and assistant principal and all these things. And so that contribution of that student to paying for all of that is gone. So,
exactly.
and just to be clear, that is a position that Public Schools First has taken, which is that public dollars belong in public schools, that the Constitution supports the common good of providing a free public education, and that our money needs to go to that. And when you look at the funding, lack of funding that we need for our public schools. Julie, what do you think about this? A lot of people are saying we can't afford vouchers. Until we fully fund our public schools and all the needs it has, we shouldn't even be considering that we can't afford it. And your look at the budget is that where you see with the corporate tax coming down and costs are going up and we have vacancies everywhere? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, that's why, every year we debate our state budget. So, this is the third time that I've had to vote on our state budget. And I think every year I've been there, I voted no on it, to be honest, because it always fails our kids, whether it's public school funding, whether it's pre-K funding, which we can talk about too, childcare, whether it's, lots of other things that, that I think that we should be putting money into. It's all a matter of priorities, right? And so, we always say, like, we have the money to say fully fund the Leandro comprehensive plan. We have that money. Instead, the Republican majority has chosen to put that money into other things, including like a very, very large rainy day fund that they say that we need for, future problems. And they keep saying that, oh, well, we're going to face, like our economy is going to crash. And so we need all this, save all this money and everything. But meanwhile, North Carolina, we're not investing, in the services and the people of our state, and we're letting all of them languish, honestly, and I know we're here to talk about schools, but there's so many other things that we're really struggling to keep up with right now because we're not making those investments, whether it's just our state agencies. I mean, I think the one thing that I get like the most emails about from constituents is DMV, because everybody needs to go to the DMV and we just don't have enough employees. We don't have enough offices. And that's a direct consequence of these budgetary decisions. So, this whole thing, like we can't afford it, it's just not true. And, it's just a matter of priorities about where we want to put our money. And they've chosen to put it in other places.
Someone says here in the chat, can you explain the difference between school vouchers and school choice? Doesn't the money follow the student?
No, it does not actually. So, I mean, that's the one thing that, Republicans actually, we're kind of seeing this new narrative that they want to do something called backpack funding, which would be devastating to our public schools because then, every student or every, child in North Carolina of school age would say you would get, $15,000 or whatever per student, and you could take that money wherever you wanted to go. If you wanted to go to a private school, if you wanted to go to a public school, things like that. So it's even more kind of that expansion, I think, of vouchers, so it's not just getting a voucher for $5,000, but you're actually taking that per pupil amount of spending that we already spend if you go to a public school. And it's like you have a backpack of money and you can kind of go wherever you want to. So that's even more concerning if we went to that funding model. And that's what I'm seeing nationwide, I think, is, the Republican Party. I know we're nonpartisan here, but we have to talk about they are in the majority. So they are the leading party. They're making all the decisions at this point. And in the states where they're doing that, they're talking just more about privatization of everything, whether it's public schools or other things. And I know Yvonne's had some webinars about privatization. I bought the book of the author that came on to talk about that. And so, that's a real concern. But when school choice is also used, a lot of people use it to talk about charter schools. And so a lot of people confuse what vouchers go to. So vouchers only go to private schools. Charter schools are considered public schools, but they're just not. So we say there's traditional public schools and then there's charter schools, and those are all underneath the public school terminology, I guess you would say. They're all controlled or monitored by DPI. Private schools are completely separate. They don't have any of the accountability. They don't have any of the same rules that both publics and charters have to maintain. Now, charters are like public schools, but down here, they don't have as much accountability either as a traditional public school. So it kind of goes traditional public, charter within that same entity, and then private is kind of over on this side. So yeah, and then somebody asked about, do charter schools have to provide to every student? No, they also, that's the other thing that, advocates like Yvonne's organization and myself, we say if charters are public schools, they should have to provide everything and have the same accountability that traditional publics have to, but they don't. And they've been given that flexibility because when charters first started, they were supposed to be this, experimental school, or they were supposed to have these unique programs, and we wanted them to have that flexibility to do those unique programs. But unfortunately, what's happened is since we lifted the cap of charters in North Carolina and we've kind of flooded the market, now people just open charter schools willy-nilly and they don't have to comply with all these things. And we've also seen a proliferation of for-profit charter operators coming into North Carolina and operating these charter schools for profit, which is also a huge concern. So I know that it kind of gets all crossed up and mixed up. And I was just telling Yvonne that there's been a narrative going on Twitter in the last couple of days about vouchers. And a lot of people are like, well, my vouchers are going to go to the charter school. And I just want to jump in and go, no, like it's two different things. So it does get confusing, but hopefully that is a good visual of how it all works.
Well, so that I want to save some time for the future stuff, so I want to go back to what happened last year. We did see a few things, right? There were a little movement in, we did have a teacher pay raise. Many people were disappointed that it was, and that. I think that we added a little bit of money to the mental health professionals. Not much there. We added, I think, a little bit to NC Pre-K. We may have raised the childcare subsidy rates a little bit, but all of these things were fairly modest. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, yes, all those things happen, but the teacher pay raises, when you compare them to inflation, there was actually a pay cut. So don't believe what you read about, that these were raises. I mean, if you look at like just the strict numbers, sure, like, they might have gotten a 2% raise or something, but you have to look at it in the whole, aspect of the economy and all these things. And then also a lot of people don't know that, we've been pushing for veteran teachers to get raises in North Carolina. If you're a veteran teacher between years 15 and 25, your salary is frozen for 10 years. You get no raises, no matter if the legislature does a raise for everybody else. It's disgusting. I mean, honestly, I just don't understand it. So that's really upsetting. So yes, there was a small raise, but it was really a cut if you look at the cost of living and housing and everything. And then mental health, yes, we've made a lot of great investments, and Kamala Harris just came, I think like a week or two ago, to Charlotte and announced some new federal funding for mental health professionals and schools in North Carolina, which is fantastic. With Medicaid expansion, we got a lot of money from the federal government when we expanded Medicaid, and a lot of that is being used for mental health, which is great. And then the pre-K, there was a little bit of funding for increasing the subsidy rates for childcare. But yes, like everything is just very incremental, very small, and definitely not meeting the needs of our state at this point.
So I think that one of the things that I get, I don't know, some days I get 50 to 100 emails. And we get a lot of messages on Facebook and a lot of comments. And one of the things that people are talking about a lot, Julie, is that these modest investments at a time when, how could we justify this huge investment in vouchers? This huge new line item. If you think about it, we don't have this line item in our budget. We have not had a line item for school vouchers, right, per se. And we not only added this huge line item, and for the next decade, Julie gave you those prices, But the other thing that we've done is we've actually given money to advertise and to recruit people to go to private schools and get school vouchers. Something that I believe harms our public school system. What other agencies or businesses actually spend money to advertise to undermine their organization? And that's what we're doing, right? If the public elected positions, if we have a common good, we have a constitution that says you must educate all children and it must be free. And we then advertise, we put $1 million in a budget to advertise, to get people to pull them out of the public schools. They had a rally in town this week, and to pull people into the private sector, that's harming our kids. I mean, do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I'll just say the reason that we had to advertise the voucher or the Opportunity Scholarship Program is because it wasn't being used. We actually, have been funding, like I said, kind of at the beginning, we've had opportunity scholarships or vouchers for several years now, and they were capped at a certain, your family could only make a certain amount of money in order to take advantage of the voucher program. And with that cap, and that, the reason they originally put the cap on was because this was supposed to be to help low income people or people who wouldn't normally be able to afford private school to be able to afford it. So that was kind of the messaging that we heard of why they started the Opportunity Scholarship Program. But with those limits and like even with the amount of money, the hundreds of thousands of dollars, I think up to millions of dollars we were putting into this program, people were not using it. And I'm sure there was many reasons for that, whether it was they didn't know about it, which is now why we're putting money into advertising it. And then two, because like I said before, a lot of people, even with the voucher, wouldn't be able to afford the tuition at the particular school that's in their community. I would also say three, that a lot of the areas where, they say they want to help kids attend private schools, they don't even have private schools to attend. They private schools tend to be bunched up into urban areas and, those kind of places. So, anyway, so I think that, they had to put money into advertising to say, well, if we're going to put even more millions of dollars in this program, we better make sure that it's being used so that people can't accuse us of, overfunding a program that is obviously not really needed, which we see a lot in a lot of other areas of the budget as well. But yeah, it's really sad, and I don't. I'm very upset and I'm very sad that the superintendent of our public school system is out in public, advertising and supporting this private school voucher system when she's, in my opinion, she should be the biggest cheerleader for our public schools and unconditionally supporting them at every turn. And unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing right now.
So let's turn back to, here we are, it's a short session. I will tell our audience that I went through and looked at some of the bills in the House and the Senate that were really very strong pro-education. And Julie, you may have some of those you want to mention, but there was ones to restore teacher longevity. There was one to put a nurse in every school. There was one to restore master's pay, fix the teacher pipeline. There was one to fix the LEP allotment. I mean, I'm going through reading all of these bills that literally went nowhere.
Yeah.
There may be some others that you might want to mention that. And so the big thing I'd like to know is, are any of these bills likely or can they be heard in this short session?
Yeah, I actually had my LA pull the bills that that, and you can see it. I mean, you can't see it too well, but like because my camera's weird. But anyway, just a whole huge list of bills, pro-education bills that were filed last year, many of them that I filed. So in the short session, which is going to be starting in earnest on April 24th, we can hear bills that were filed last year in the long session that made crossover. So meaning they passed one chamber and and then are sitting in the other chamber but never made it through both chambers. So if it may cross over, we can still consider it. And then any bills that have to do with funding. Well, luckily, many of the bills that are on this list have to do with funding, right? Because that's like our main push for education is we need more funding. So, whether it's, like I filed a bill, School Meals for All Act, so that it had, appropriations for free breakfast and lunch for every school kid in North Carolina, just like we did during the pandemic. And many states continued that after the pandemic. And I mean, again, we have the money to do this, we just don't have the will. So like, for example, I filed another bill around, just more funding for pre-K and Smart Start. So all those kind of things that are adjustments to the budget, the long session budget, those all can be heard in the short session.
So, okay, so here's a couple, I'm so glad you brought up School Meals for All. Public Schools First is part of the coalition called School Meals for All. I encourage everyone on this call tonight and those who will listen in later on the recording. This is a very important opportunity in the short session. Sometimes in the long session, there's such a crowded, so crowded around the big 2-year budget that some of the really critical things get left on the side. So Julie, is this an opportunity? Can we actually pass School Meals for All this short session? And I will tell you that there's a lot of states that already do this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of states that have universal meals, or a lot of other states that are in the process of doing it. North Carolina does not. North Carolina has a coalition. It's called, School Meals for All North Carolina. So I want to encourage all of you, and I've tried to put some of the narrative of your bill here. No-cost meals, why are they important? Kids do better in school. They, But so Julie, what can we do what should advocates do if let's just focus on School Meals for All?
Well, I will say that the School Meals for All Coalition is, to me, it was one of the best advocacy groups last year. We get a lot of information and one pagers from tons of different groups, as the long session is going on. But I just wanted to give a shout out to the coalition, because they were so good about, relentlessly, being up at the legislature almost every week, dropping different things in our offices, whether it was, drawings from kids saying, like, I love my school meals, which is always catches your eye. I love those kind of things. One pagers just talking about what a difference, feeding kids makes for their educational success and, their familial success, like all those things. I mean, so in my opinion, like a good advocacy campaign, being from the advocacy background, and also, I mean, I love that I've been on both sides, because I feel like I can kind of talk, with authority. And I think that, being an advocate and having a good advocacy campaign means being consistent. You can't just come up and talk to us once and just think that's going to do it. You have to be up at the legislature, pretty consistently throughout session, talking to legislators about these issues. Keep on them, don't let them like blow you off and say, well, I'll get back to you. Call them back like the next day and be like, did you look at my one pager I dropped off? Or what do you think of this? And if you don't agree, why? Have them explain, like, why don't they want to feed kids? Like, make them, justify it, honestly, because I just don't know how anybody could. So, and we hear a lot like, well, that's not our responsibility. That's the family responsibility to feed their own families, and so we just have to battle that narrative, and fight back against that. And I think all the data, obviously shows that if kids are well fed at school, they're going to be more successful. And isn't that what we want for all of our kids in North Carolina? So yes, I think, I'm not saying that it's going to happen, because honestly, this majority party that's running the legislature right now, I haven't seen a lot of will, to really pour into our kids like I would want them to. But I never would say don't try. And I think that this is an issue. It shouldn't be a partisan issue, right? And so we just have to think of a way to kind of message it that like they're gonna say, yeah, it is the right thing to do. So yes, I
I
think we
put a
should.
link in here and, School Meals for All North Carolina. There's a lot of ways that you can get involved. You can be an ambassador, a champion, you can write a letter. And we are going to be asking folks because, and I wanted Julie's opinion on this, this is doable, right? Like sometimes in the short session, we shouldn't beat our heads against the wall about things that may not happen. But we do know that we could do something school meals for all. We are hoping that we could see increase for childcare subsidies in NC pre-K. We could change how we're paying our teachers, right? We could put a moratorium on vouchers, and we could do something about mental health professionals because all of these are active bills that have been sent over and either didn't make the crossover, but they made the criteria of having a bill with the budget in it. So this is really exciting to me to hear you say that. And I just wanted to share really fast with you in the chat, friends, if I can share this information with you. When Julie, you were talking about, we did make a little bit of progress with the mental health stuff because this is really something bothering a lot of parents right now. And these are the current reports that talks about what we have. And I want our colleagues on the line to look at some of these numbers if you're not familiar. One nurse for every, Julie, maybe you could talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, I'm just reading what you put. Yeah, I mean, obviously North Carolina is like way, way, way short of all of our, support professionals in schools. I mean, the ratios in North Carolina are terrible when you look at, like Yvonne put in here, like for example, this one school psychologist for almost every 2,000 students, and it's supposed to be every 500 students. I mean, it's terrible. So, I mean, I think that, and we bring up these numbers all the time in the legislature. We talk about them all the time. What's frustrating is that we hear a lot about mental health. We're all concerned about mental health, and that's the one thing that they bring up a lot when we talk about gun violence, right? Well, this is a mental health problem. But yet, when I say, well, if it is a mental health problem, then let's invest in mental health and get more mental health professionals in our schools to help the kids before they get to the point where they're going to commit some horrible crime. And, so it's kind of double speak, it's like, well, it's this problem. Okay, no, it's this problem. And obviously we're way, way, way behind. And I don't know how we're ever going to catch up at this point. Because honestly, the other thing that worries me is that people are not going into these fields anymore. Like, I don't know how many people are going to school to be a school psychologist, for example, where they could probably make more money in private practice. So we have to also make sure that, we're paying people what they deserve. And I know that I've worked with Public Schools First and some other advocates around the fact that, like, for example, we need to pay our school social workers for their advanced degrees, which now we don't do. And so, just things like that we have to correct a lot of those things before I think that we're going to make real progress on those ratios.
And Julie, could you talk a little bit about, so I think that one of the things that the reason we'd like for you to talk about these subjects is because when we look at the whole child, right? And these are the kind of things that the North Carolina Coalition on Children have brought to us as advocates too, right? Like when you look at the whole child, them coming to school and having breakfast, what impact that does. Having NC pre-K, which prepares them for kindergarten. Having the resources at school for mental health issues so that the teachers can teach and kids who need help can get it through the specialists. These are all things that make the child have a better opportunity to learn. So can you talk a little bit about NC pre-K and the situation we're in right there? Because I know that's something that you care about.
I care deeply about it. So last year I got to spend a whole entire school year with one NC pre-K class in North Raleigh. And the reason I did that, like Yvonne said, I substitute teach. I started substitute teaching K-12 during the pandemic because they were so desperate for substitute teachers. And, I was home a lot more, just like we all were. And I thought, what better opportunity as a legislator than to sub and see exactly what's going on in the classroom. I mean, as a longtime PTA person, I was in schools all the time, but being a sub is a lot different than being a parent volunteer. But anyway, so then when the pandemic happened and we just kept hearing all these things about childcare and what a crisis our childcare and early education fields are in right now. I really wanted to sub in early education. So I got connected with a pre-K class and got to see, and I was planning on only going, a few times and just kind of helping out in the classroom and just seeing how a classroom worked. And I just fell in love with the kids so much and the teachers and the owner of the center that I worked in that I ended up staying all year. And I was there. I tried to go once a week if I could during session. It got a little crazy, but it was like just if you want to make an investment in education, pre-K and early education is where to do it. And what I'm seeing more in the last few years is just there's so much great research and data into that brain science shows that pouring into these kids at ages 0 to 5 will get the biggest investment back. And so we're trying, and I know that there's a lot of groups out there that are really trying to inform legislators and policymakers about this science, to say, like, if you are concerned about where your money is going to go the furthest and where you want to make those investments, early education and NC pre-K and pre-K is the place to go. And we're so lucky to have had Governor Hunt, lead our state for so long, who was a champion for early education and started the Smart Start program. And now, we have this NC pre-K program that serves 4-year-olds. In Wake County, we've been even more it's been even more of a benefit because now we have a 3-school, which is modeled very closely after the NC pre-K program, but it's for 3-year-olds. And I was happy to go last week to see 2 3-school programs and just see, what those kids are doing in there. So we have to make our pre-K program available to every child in North Carolina. It's not right now because there's just not enough slots available. We also don't have enough teachers to teach all these classrooms because the pay is so low for early education. So, like that was another, a couple bills that we filed last year was around increasing pay. There's a program called the Wages Program here in North Carolina, which is like a salary supplement program for early education teachers. And so we want to make sure we're funding that more. But again, this is another area where unfortunately people aren't going into this profession because most of the teachers literally make minimum wage, and before Medicaid expansion, a lot of them didn't even have health benefits. So, we have to just make sure that we're supporting the industry as much as we can and investing in our youngest learners.
And so for NC pre-K, for our guests who don't know, do you have an NC pre-K slot? It is funded by local money, state money, and federal. So one of the things that concerns me as a statewide advocate for public education is that a lot of our small rural or counties cannot afford pre-K. If they have an NC pre-K program, every county does have a program. They have small ones. They really don't have that local match. As Julie was talking about in Wake County, not only does Wake County can make the local match, they can add more slots totally on their own because they can afford it. So if you're working poor in Sampson County or Duplin County, you do not have the same opportunities for local funding. You don't have the same tax bases and so forth. So we also think that there's some this is unethical for, taxpayers. All taxpayers across the state pay into the fund. And guess what? A lot of the voucher money is not going to go to rural counties. We're going to take your tax dollars in rural areas and spend it in Cary Academy, for example. We're going to spend it in other areas. And the same thing with pre-K. Pre-K is going to be used more by counties who have a match and who can afford to match more. So we have created a situation where we are not providing the same equal, high quality public education across the state. And Julie, that kind of brings me to ask you to talk a little bit just quickly about not the whole history of Leandro, but kind of where we are with Leandro and why it speaks to what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm sure you've probably done a whole webinar just on Leandro at some point, but yeah, I mean, obviously this case has been going on for, over 2 decades now. So unfortunately, so last year, before the election, and the Supreme Court changing over to Republican controlled Supreme Court, our Supreme Court said that yes, the legislature was in violation of the Constitution, ordered us to pay to fund the comprehensive plan, which was created by an outside agency that said to comply with our Constitution, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And it was very comprehensive. It had a lot of money, but again, we could afford to start paying on it over, and it's like a long-term plan, like a 10-year plan. And so the Supreme Court said we are ordered to do this. And of course, the legislative leadership said, no, we're not going to do it. And they continued to fight it. And then unfortunately, they took over the Supreme Court. And so now there's a conservative majority. And after the conservative majority took over the court, Berger and Moore, the leaders of the legislature, filed something that says we want the Supreme Court to reconsider Leandro again. And the Supreme Court said, okay, we'll reconsider it again, even though there was no reason or precedent to do that. It's like they're just taking up the case willy-nilly. Like usually in a legal procedure, there has to be a reason. A court just can't keep reconsidering the same case over and over again. But unfortunately, they decided they would do that. And so on February 22nd, less than a month from now, they will be having oral arguments at the North Carolina Supreme Court to reconsider once again whether the court can basically order the legislature to appropriate money. That's kind of what it all comes down to. The legislative leadership is saying checks, not checks and balances, but separation of powers, right? They're saying the legislature's job is to appropriate money. The court's job is to, decide and interpret laws, and you can't tell us to appropriate money. That's kind of their whole argument. But, before the court said, well, yes, we can. If you're in violation of the state constitution, that's our job, is to say whether, you're violating the law. And so that's kind of where it stands at this point. And I will just give a shout out that we're going to be having a big advocacy day on February 22nd. Every Child NC, which is the big coalition of lots of different organizations who are leading the charge on the Leandro case, is having a big event on February 22nd in Raleigh. So if you can come, I know like they're going to try to get into the oral argument. Not everyone will be able to because it's a small room, but then they're going to have a rally and all kinds of activities and speakers and everything. So would love for you guys to come down. I will be there and be talking about our legislature's obligation that we're failing on. And every year that I've been in the legislature, I filed a very comprehensive bill that matches the funding of the comprehensive plan, year 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'll be filing another one in the short session. So, because we want to be able to show here, the legislature could fund this bill, could pass this bill, and here's the way to do it, and they're ignoring that. So I think it's really important to continue to file that bill because it kind of sets, it has evidence, like you had a bill and you didn't take it up and you didn't consider it and you didn't pass it.
So I want to stop for a second and see if anybody else has comments, questions, or statements. I want to make sure before I ask Julie a few more questions. Anyone have any comments or questions they want to ask? You can unmute yourself or you can put it in chat. This is, when you talk with Julie, you get straight talk and it's informal and you can talk to her. Patricia. Unmute. I hate that word, unmute. We can't hear you, Patricia. So sorry. Patricia, we can't hear you.
She's not muted, but I don't know why I can't hear.
This is Heather. I'm going to jump in while she's working on her microphone there. I just wanted to go back to one of the questions that was in the chat early on when we were talking about the school meals for all. Someone put in a comment, a question that said, are we at risk of the General Assembly rejecting any federal funding around meals? Like we've heard some other states rejecting federal funding. Is that a potential problem in our state too?
Yeah, I've seen that. I haven't heard that. I mean, I haven't heard any rumblings of that, so hopefully not. And because we're not in session, I don't know if there was like a certain date that they had to kind of reject that funding by. Luckily, we're not there, so we can't cause any more harm until we go back. But yeah, I haven't heard anything like that. Hopefully not.
Patricia, are you back on now?
Maybe put it in the chat.
Yeah, put something in the chat because we're not hearing you at all. While she's typing that in the chat, I want to say that one of the things so school meals for all has a lot of layers to it, y'all, but you understand that one of the big downsides of it is a lot of our kids feel ashamed when they have to go and get a free lunch or reduced lunch, or they have to pay a copay, or they get called to the office because their copay hasn't been paid by their family. And schools are in the business all the time and a wasted time of trying to collect money, like they're debt collectors, right? Like, collect monies and embarrass kids over eating. Okay, so there's just layers and layers of this that we should be ashamed for. I write a letter a week to the General Assembly members that are on those committees and say, we are better than this. This is North Carolina. We can feed our kids. We don't have to make them prove that they're poor and then nag them for a copayment and then chase their families, down the street trying to get $10. Okay, and our school personnel shouldn't have to do this. Did you get your question in the chat yet, Patricia?
I don't see anything.
She's working on it, I hope. Anybody
here.
else?
It's in there. Oh, okay. She's asking about why did some of the budget not be bid on by more than one company? Yeah, there was a bunch of things that I know it was in the news. Great question. There was in the news, there was some things that were brought up, especially around I think it was like a reading software, that I got a bunch of emails from teachers saying, why did the legislature appropriate money to buy this reading software when it's already been basically proven that it wasn't helpful, it didn't comply with, our reading curriculum, and it was a mess, honestly. And I do have to give credit to DPI and Catherine Truitt, because apparently they even went to the legislature when they heard that this was going to be in the budget and said, we don't want this software. And it was still in the budget, and it's still going to be appropriated because it was in there. And unfortunately, last year I actually saw several of these types of bills where somebody would file a bill or whatever, and it would say, we want to appropriate this much money to this program. And a couple of them we heard in K-12 education committee, and I would be, we'd ask questions like, why this particular program? And then like we would actually research, we would go on, just Google it. And a lot of these things were just like these startup companies. And why that is that lobbyists or whoever comes up to the legislature gets a meeting with a legislator and convinces them that this is what North Carolina needs. Maybe, I don't want to, say they've contributed to their campaign, but you never know, things like that happen all the time. And there is a vetting and a bidding process that's supposed to happen, but unfortunately that doesn't always happen. And sometimes the legislature appropriates money for things that aren't the greatest things, and that's unfortunately just part of how the sausage gets made. So
And a great question here relates more to educators on the call, but we need to get changes in SB 743, optional retirement plan, big concern. That's over in the Senate side, Julie. I don't know, but you probably know a little bit about that, or Colleen, can you talk about that?
Yeah, it passed in the Senate, 48, everybody there voted for it. Didn't even get to the House, but it gives that optional retirement plan for the ECU healthcare and the UNC healthcare folks, which is like 36,000 people. And, now you're familiar with it, Julie, I'm sure, because hopefully you're going to hear more about this spring. But now new employees in those groups don't have the option of joining our retirement plan, which is really going to weaken the state retirement plan.
Oh yeah, I got an email from somebody about this just very recently. So yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely getting on people's radar. And so
Yeah.
I don't know why we never heard it in the House. Maybe somebody over in the House didn't like it, or I don't know. You never know why, but I'll definitely keep my radar up for that for
We'll
sure.
come see you. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Please do.
Hey, Linda, go ahead, Linda.
Hey. Yeah, I was trying to get ready for my meeting tomorrow, but yeah, about that whole thing, because it got sent to the Rules Committee in the House, and then the Senate they stuck it in their Senate budget, and everybody kind of overlooked it because the fiscal notice acted like it wasn't going to cost that much, and so I mean, you wouldn't believe the people. I mean, hardly anybody knew that was actually in there and what it would actually do.
So do you think it's going to come up again?
We want it to. We're asking.
Well, we'd like to get it changed if possible.
Okay.
In fact, today, I think I heard that, yeah, I know this person is pretty smart that we were talking to today. He said he thought that the treasurer should sue, because what the hospitals were doing is really going to ruin our pension plan. That's going to affect the health insurance too.
Interesting.
But he's involved in his campaign, so
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a good time to get people interested when they're on the ballot, no matter what the subject. So I know you, Linda, keep it up. So I think
and I are working together.
yeah. Well, we're getting close to the time we promised to kind of jump off, and I wanted to just to see one last call for anybody wants to share any information with us. I think we're going to go to the next couple of slides. But Julie, as a kind of a closing remarks really fast before I talk about this webinar coming up, is there anything else you could share with us? Because we want to be educated public education voters, and we want to go to the General Assembly this year and do what we think would have positive outcomes for our kids. Meals, pre-K, paying our teachers better, having more staff in the building. Give us some words of advice on what we should do.
I mean, I've been working with a lot more groups to kind of create an inside-outside strategy, what we're calling, where groups like Public Schools First and Every Child NC and lots of other these, the great work that you're all doing to coordinate, with legislators like myself so that we can make sure we're all on the same page about what we're fighting for, which I think is really important. Because if I'm in the building doing one thing and you guys are outside the building doing another, that's not really going to be successful. So we're really trying to be more coordinated, going forward about, just making sure we're all on the same page about the things that we want to be pushing for. But I think that the one thing, like I said before, around school meals, as an example, is just making sure that the pressure stays up. A lot of times we just see, maybe one advocacy day and a lot of people come, and that's great. I love advocacy days. I love having people in the building and coming, but we just, to really make a change, you have to have that sustained pressure. And going into the short session, I hopefully we will not be there that long, but I say that every year and it never happens. So I think just, as the session is going along and if you see something, really going off the rails or some bad piece of legislation, comes up, just continue the pressure, continue that public the people outside the building, making sure that the people inside the building know how you feel about things. And it can't just be a one-off thing. It has to be continuous. And I also think that what I would love to see is just literally more people in the building, making their voices heard, seeing people there is really powerful. And, it's one thing, and I know not everyone lives in Raleigh, not everyone can come up to Raleigh all the time. So whether that's just, emailing, phone calls, and not just like a form email, like make sure you're telling your personal story about, something that's happening maybe in your kid's school or, a friend or a teacher, those are the kind of things that make the big difference. So I appreciate, everything that you guys do. And I love your next slide because it looks like you're going to have that 1 hour on Leandro, like I just
Let's
said.
put that up. Let's put that up, and let me share with you folks this event. So coming up very, very soon, we are very honored that we're going to have two incredible constitutional and education law experts. Jack Boger is the former UNC Law School Dean, much revered. He's very prolific in his writings in constitutional law, and joined by Jane Weddick, and I think she is just recently retired from the Duke Law School. These two saints just signed off on an amicus brief, and Julie's an attorney. She can tell you what that is, but basically it's a paper, a presentation, a written document. It's a legal document stating their case for why Leandro should be upheld and why it is appropriate. It matches our Constitution, and it should be upheld and funded. So Jane Weddick has also done a lot of writing. I encourage you to go on the Duke Law School webpage and look up her reports. She's done a lot of reports on the charter schools and how they perform in North Carolina. So I really encourage you to come. I really want us to talk to the real experts. And I think these two leading folks can answer a lot of questions for us and help us advocate for it. And of course, we are a part of the Every Child NC Coalition. We have learned a lot from people's advice like Julie. We are members of the School Meals for All. It's a coalition. So we've learned that we all have to work together, and we are going to have a day of action. Come over you can't stay all day. It's okay. Come at 10 o'clock. We're going to be outside the Supreme Court showing our signs and showing our support for funding and upholding Leandro. We're going to march down to the Capitol. We're going to have a wonderful press conference, and then some people will have to leave. But if you can stay, we're going to walk across the street to the Edenton United Methodist Church and have lunch and have a program. So it's a great time to meet people from all over the state. We have buses coming in, and so I encourage you to please come. So if you want to get ready for February 22nd, come to our webinar on February 7th. Learn more about what the brief says and about what you can be saying to the Supreme Court and to the judges and to the legislators about your support for it. Making your own opinion after getting your information. And that's something we feel very strongly about at Public Schools First. Our job is to gather information and educate people so that you can make a better decision of who you're going to support. So I would encourage you. Julie said something tonight, and we stuck the slide in there, but we have a report that Dr. Coons, Heather, who's on the call with us, did. This is how North Carolina tax dollars are used to discriminate against students and family. We have all the information in there about every private school in North Carolina last year that got vouchers. And what you will find is that most of them are religious school, and even the ones that aren't have lots of rules of who can apply, who can get in, how you can stay there, the discrimination. And we are funding discrimination in our state through our private school vouchers. So there's lots of levels about vouchers that should concern you as voters and as taxpayers. There's layers of it, right? Are we spending our money wisely? Can we afford to do it? Is it unethical to fund discrimination? Are we advertising to self-harm our own public schools? There's just layers and layers, but this report will give you a lot of real information And we give you the website for these schools so you can look yourself and see if you think this is someplace your tax dollars should go. So thank you, Heather. Heather has worked on this really hard. Last thing I'll say is their power is in numbers. So share our information, please, friends. Share it, like us, and all these mediums. You know, we're working really, really hard. We're a small group of part-time folks that are trying to advocate for our children. And we need your voice. We need your numbers. That helps people take us serious, and it helps our donors fund us, right? We need a little funding to keep all this going. So thank you, Julie, so much for coming. What I'm taking away tonight is that, you know, all was not lost in the last session. We did make a little improvements, and that's thanks to people like Julie and others who advocate and push really hard. If they weren't there, think of what might happen, right? So we didn't make the progress we wanted, but thanks to a lot of pushing by a lot of child and education advocates, we made some progress. There's opportunities in the short session. And I think Julie is kind of giving us some good hints on how to do that. And I hope you'll join us on the 7th, the 22nd, and I hope you'll show up when the General Assembly comes back in town, like Julie says. Show up and, you know, talk to your legislators. And, you know, this is something that is important. I have a friend who doesn't like to talk to people in person. And so she waits until 6 o'clock every night and she calls her favorite legislators and leaves a voice message. They're very polite messages, but she says, I saw this happen today and I think this. And so she's really good at making those phone calls, and, you know, she's really good at sending in those emails. So everybody has a role to play. Thank you, Julie. You're awesome for your
Thank
time.
you. I had to show my shirt. I couldn't I wore my shirt, but then you couldn't
Red
even
thread.
see it. So, well.
Okay, I love it. Okay, so friends, thank you. And if there's anything that you need to share with us, info@publicschoolsfirstnc.org, right? And you know, anytime that you want to share your story, your advocacy, something that's wonderful going on in your county, we ask you to please communicate with us, because that's what we want to share. We're looking for people all over the state to raise their hand and be a kind of a contact point for their county, so they can share information with us and we can network with them back and to get this started. So look for more about, you know, being a pen pal with us, the North Carolina Public Education Network. We're building it because we think that it's going to take voices from all over the state to move us forward. So again, good night. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.